So hi, this is Gavin from FE News, and I'm here today to unpack the skills for the future of work. I have the great pleasure to be joined by Nazrene Mannie from the Global Apprenticeship Network and Bettina Schaller from Adecco. And Nazrene, could you introduce yourself and say a bit of detail about maybe what the Global Apprenticeship Network is?
Thanks, Gavin, and morning, everyone. As Gavin said, I'm Nazrene Mannie. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Apprenticeship Network. And what GAN Global is really an organization that brings together public and private partners. We drive an agenda for work-based learning, for skilling, for all kinds of skills development policies and practice, responding to the future of work, responding to the changing nature of work, and really wanting to get people into and through the labor market. And we do this in partnership with our corporate members, as well as our strategic partners ranging from the ILO, UNESCO, the OECD, as well as employer organizations such as the IOE and Business at OECD.
Thank you, Nazrene. Bettina, can you introduce yourself as well? And just to highlight to everyone in the audience as well that Nazrene and Bettina are also both part of the B20 Future of Work and Education Task Force. So Bettina, maybe you could introduce yourself, maybe explain what the B20 Task Force is as well. It'd be great, please.
With the greatest of pleasure, Gavin. And first of all, wonderful to be with you today. So thank you so much. Wonderful to be here with Nazrene. So indeed, the B20 Employment Task Force, or Future of Work and Education Task Force, how it was called this year under the presidency of the Saudi Arabian G20. And that's important, this link between the G20 year, is the group of experts that gathers on a yearly basis to deep dive into what changes are necessary to labor market structural reform, because that's what we're in right now, this acknowledgement that labor markets, the way they've been functioning, are actually not working anymore. So it's all about reform, about the changes that need to be made, just taking into consideration all the trends and impacts that are happening out there in the world. So this task force reconvenes every year. It's actually recomposed every year. As I said, this year it was under the it is under the Saudi Arabian presidency. Next year it will be Italy, so a new group is again. I've actually been a member of this task force for the past 11 years. So it's been quite interesting to see the development of this task force, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about that just now.
Yeah, very much. Thank you. Just to highlight to the audience as well, we're being very international today. So we're doing a three-way call from the UK, from Switzerland, and South Africa. And I just want to say it's a great pleasure to be with you all today. I want to really look into a couple of things. There's been two really interesting reports recently, and I want to unpack both of those, but really to look globally at the skills for the future of work. The first report we're going to sort of explore a little bit is the B20 Future of Work and Education, which is a 2020 policy paper with recommendations for the G20, which is very interesting, got global impact within that. Also, Adecco's Resetting Normal, Defining a New Era of Work, which is really interesting. We're going to go into that in a minute, and I think you're going to really find some of these points really interesting and what we need to be thinking around the skills for developing people for the future. But Nazrene, can I kick off with you? How are the skills for the future of work changing?
Gavin, I think, for the last 4 to 5 years, we've really been working globally, trying to develop strategies for this impending future of work. I think lots of fear-based approaches, worry about machines taking over. And I think a lot of effort has been put in place to try and reassure countries, companies, organizations, as well as us as individuals, that the future will require this human-centered approach, that people need to be at the center, that machines are not going to take over and drive us out of work. In fact, there are opportunities for greater job creation. Yes, some jobs will change, as in any revolution that we've seen as industries and technologies change over the centuries. So for us, the future of work is really about having this set of flexible and adaptable skills. It's about us as individuals being able to incorporate ourselves into the labor market, adapt to the changing nature of work, but have a base set of skills on which we can build. And really for the GAN, it's about this concept of work-based learning, so learning on the job. It's about lifelong learning, so it means that we're not static. It means that we can respond to developments, whether it's technological, whether it's labor-related. And I think what we've seen in the last 8 months is that COVID has accelerated all of these discussions. So all of these hypotheses that we had about what the future could mean, they've suddenly been brought upon us. And yes, there's been major impact on the labor market, major impact in terms of employment prospects for people. But at the same time, we've seen huge growth in certain industries, huge response and resilience and innovation coming through. And I think that's what the future of work is about, that as a society, we respond and we adapt.
Yeah, very, very much. And the two reports we talk about here, just to put it into context, I've taken a term that's really influenced me from a Washington Post columnist, actually. And he's talking about the world before COVID, being BC, where basically most of skills development was actually organised, arranged, thought about. We're currently in DC during COVID, and hopefully we're going to be moving into AC after COVID very soon, hopefully. But Bettina, how do you see, because there's two reports here which are looking at the impact of the way that COVID has affected the skills for the future of work. How do you sort of see this during COVID time has been affecting those skills needs for the future?
No, actually, Gavin, I'd like to actually almost challenge that, because what we're seeing, what I keep saying, is that the world will not be after COVID, but with COVID. So it's not going to be a matter of from one day to another, it's gone. First of all, the virus is gone, or, we'll be able to obviously, hopefully deal with it from the health point of view. But again, all the effects are there to stay, with us for a longer time. And definitely in our world of labor markets and employment, again, we see it as with COVID. So I'm one of those who talks about with COVID. What we've seen, and there we're not the first ones to say it, is the crisis has accelerated what was already happening before. And that's why, and that's both in a good sense, but obviously also in a negative sense. And that's why if we look at before, the trends that we'd seen, for instance, had been around the fact that the world of work is shifting to become more flexible and diverse. And that's something that we find as well, by the way, in that G20 report to the heads of state, which will be presented then in November. And so clearly, this is one of the facts that's been incredibly accelerated from different perspectives, though, and that has an effect on how we as workers, whether we work in an employment relationship, whether we are self-employed, whether we're a gig worker, actually whether we're not employed, we've all now been thrown into this tumble box in a way that has, shifted it all around, and there's new ways that we've had to deal with it, and importantly, actually, that governments had to deal with. Okay, what has it meant for those people? So that's one point I'd like to point out. The other one is around the digitization of, let's just say, everything, right? And basically also the way that we're working, which very quickly brings us to what this has meant for digital skills. You want to unpack skills, it is clear that we have to talk about digital skills. We've all been through it, what it's meant for us having to learn how to work with all these new and different tools, whether we wanted it or not. And by the way, that's independent again of the sector you're working in. So that's not necessarily white collar or the services sector. That has applied to everywhere. So what I say there is, I almost see this angle of digital skills, I see as a language. And one thing I've been saying all my life is you can never speak enough languages. So if anybody would have asked me what should I be doing, I would always have said, go out and learn languages. And here it's this digital literacy, right? The digital languages to me are one of the elements that we knew about before already, but now it is clear and on the table. If you cannot speak digital, then you're going to be on the, let's say, side of the disadvantaged populations in the workforce.
Yeah, very much. I think it's interesting to sort of lead into the B20 Future of Work and Education report, because there's a big section there about digital skills, and particularly about there being a basic skill set for digital skills. And what I thought was interesting, in 10 years' time, the UK was seeing that 12% of the population at the moment of potentially going to be going into like this disadvantaged group, like you sort of said, really around lacking the basic digital literacy or language skills. India, out of interest, is the report is saying has got about 30%. So how can we, it's a UK term, level this up. How can we level this up and be proactive in trying to adjust this so as there is no one at disadvantage within having a digital skills gap? Bettina, what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? If not $1 billion question, that's what everybody's looking at as well. I think really at this stage, what we do, it must be done all over, meaning that we need to look at the education systems that have to start incorporating, and not only incorporating, but actually focusing also on digital literacy. But then we also have to look at the workplace. And actually, if I may, the work that we're doing within the B20, which stands for, again, Business 20, admittedly always has this angle of linking the world of work to the world of education. And here, if you look at the digital piece, there's no doubt that workplaces need to incorporate into what they offer their workforce this training as well. Now, there's one challenge linked to that, which is, it all sounds easy and well, but first of all, how do you access the right offering of, what should one be learning out there? And this is a topic I understand in the UK is quite something. There's a huge industry in the learning space and also in the digital learning space. So how can you make the choice about which solution actually to apply? And this is also where the Global Apprenticeship Network notably comes in, of course. And the other question that we're then interested in as well is, again, it's all well and good to talk about the need to digitally skill and reskill, but who pays for it? And I've just mentioned, companies are also supposed to reskill their own workforce, but this is a big financial burden for many, many businesses, employers. And it's something we've got some thoughts about as well, but let me take a small break here.
Nazrene, what do you think things we should be considering to address the digital skills gap or digital poverty as well?
Gavin, that's an important issue for us, and Bettina mentioned GAN, and we have GAN networks ranging from Australia, New Zealand to Malawi, Bangladesh, into South America, and each of those is so different, and economies that are so much more mature than other. And if you take Malawi, for example, you have a 10% electricity penetration rate. So, we can't even begin to speak about digital advocacy, digital skilling. It's really about a back to basics approach. And I think that's the important thing for the GAN that we realized is at this point in time, very much a hybrid approach. It's about trying not to overburden systems by insisting on a digital approach, a universal digital approach, as important as it is. We have to find other low-tech means of penetration. And we're seeing, for example, that, television and radio outreach is proving really effective in many of these countries. Community newspapers, printing of tasks, parts of the curricula. But I think the key thing for the GAN is one, the promotion and advocacy of these approaches by the private sector. So we've seen our members taking it upon themselves to work in communities where they're active and where they have operations. And that's far more than corporate social responsibility. It's really about meaningfully engaging to uplift the communities. The second is meaningful digital skills policies. And we were also working with our private sector members to engage with governments and large international organizations such as the International Labour Organization, the OECD, UNESCO, to make sure that, when we have digital skilling policies, they need to be effective, but they also need to be implementable. Because, far too often there's that policy divide where you have very fancy policy, but falls short in implementation because countries don't have the resources and they don't have the capacity. So it's about being practical, it's about being decisive, but it's also it's about being responsible and ensuring that we align to the local context. So for me, the heart of it is collaboration and partnership, and public-private partnerships are key to this. At the same time, we have to ensure that we have this combination of the high-tech solutions as well as the really low-tech opportunities for penetration. So we need to be innovative, but we also can't get ahead of ourselves.
No, very, very much. Can we move on to another point on the B20 report as well, which is around matching education to future labour market needs? Mm-hmm. Nazrene, what are your sort of thoughts around how we can, it's in a way, it then leads on to my next question about lifelong learning really. It's how do we teach people to learn, to continually develop about lifelong learning? How do we, develop that from early stage rather than asking someone who hasn't been back to education for 20 years to reskill? If we can teach that now, how can we, continually develop and have a lifelong learning strategy from day one?
Yeah, and I think you'll see that B20 report covers the whole system from basic education, from the schooling system through to post-school. So once people move into the labor market, and I think that's the key. The heart of it is trying to, build in meaningful strategies and policy solutions within the schooling system. And here, to Bettina's point, the language skills that are key, those soft skills or foundational skills, I think those transversal skills, I've seen so many words, but it's about, problem solving, it's about adaptability, about creativity, and how do we build that into the system? And I think those lay the foundation then for building on far more technical skills, the diversity of technical skills. And I think for the GAN, our one very strong input into the B20 position was the role of vocational education, because we know that vocational education is a key lever, and we will build on that to enhance this approach to lifelong learning, to ensure that work-based learning becomes embedded into systems. So not only to have that structured qualification-orientated system, and South Africa is very similar to the UK. How do we structure learning that's not fixed on our national skills frameworks, but it allows for building of skills and recognition of learning as you move on through your career. So I think there are multiple avenues, but I think that the issue at the heart of the B20 is about a systematic approach that starts with the schooling system and continues through the university system, the vocational education system, and then once you're in the labor market, as an individual, you must drive your own learning. But as employers, we also need to provide the safe space for learning to take place.
Yeah, very much. Bettina, what are your views on that? Because obviously going into your day job with Adecco, who work with numerous different global and local employers across numerous different industries, how do you sort of see what individual employers are seeing as the importance to meet the future skills needs according to labour market needs?
Yeah, look, what's actually fascinating indeed is that probably the answer we see to that question, which requires, innovation and again, taking into consideration all the shifts and changes in trends that have happened. So the answer probably lies in a model that's been around for quite a while, and that might seem a bit odd, and that's indeed the apprenticeship model. Just this combination of, first of all, demand-led skilling, and then really linking it to the knowledge of the world of work, of the world workplace, is what we see has worked best. And I mean, again, quite, simply, if we look at the countries that have the absolute lowest rates of youth unemployment, as it is, and interestingly, there's a correlation as well to levels of productivity, and again, of workforce participation. All these countries have this apprenticeship model as a base, as part of their system, in what is, of course, a broader skilling and education landscape. There is not only the apprenticeship system, there is just as well an academic path, and now we see more and more, and that's important as well, we see so-called non-traditional forms of education. But again, this work readiness linkage is just very, very high and is embedded into the structure of the labor market. And here, when I say embedded, the emphasis that we're looking for is that employers have understood and commit as part of their daily, or rather of their overall human capital strategy, and therefore of their daily, focus to skill, and upskill, starting at younger talents, but then yes, taking it through older cohorts of their workforce as well.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you. And it's very encouraging to know that apprenticeships are still, like you're seeing from different global employers, that are so important to be able to actually match those future skills needs. I 100% agree. And so will our audience as well. And it's great to know that your client base is. But often, because just the nature of these things, large employers do often have the ear of government, and government often sets policy on things like apprenticeships and skills. What I thought was interesting on the B20 report was around entrepreneurship and looking at the engine for SMEs and micro businesses, which become those massive corporates of the future. Nazrene, what are your views on how we can embed entrepreneurship into it's also in a way sort of into lifelong learning as well, because many people work for other employers and go out and do their own thing. Others, like young people, want to go off and do their own thing straight away. How can we embed entrepreneurship and all of those really cool skills, which are really valuable for all sorts of jobs in the future? How can we embed that into learning?
Yeah, Gavin, for me, entrepreneurship is quite an exciting pathway, but we also know it's not an automatic pathway. So some of the skills that we need to start building into our curricula include business management skills, budgeting skills, financial management skills, things like doing taxes. We haven't told people when we encourage them to go off and start their own business, the amount of bureaucracy that comes into running and managing your own business, because there's actually very little time for the creativity. You get bogged down in filing returns, in doing paperwork, in managing people. So it's all of those skills that we actually need to teach for people who are interested or at some point want to pursue this new pathway. HR and labor management skills, and it cuts across any country. How to manage people, how to manage disciplinary action, how to source funding, how to raise funding. How do you do a pitch to a VC company, for example? That's quite a skill that we can't assume people have. So I think there's a range of very important technical skills that come with being an entrepreneur that get bypassed in most of our curricula. So in South Africa, we have a particular program on entrepreneurship. I don't know how successful that has been, because it's taught in a very functional school-based system. So I'm not sure that you can actually do that. So I think the context of the learning, where the learning takes place, is important. I think having gone in and tried and tested running your own business and perhaps then coming back and doing these courses or doing it part-time is key. But I do think, at the heart of it is a support system for entrepreneurs. Because having that really cool idea, having this change or this innovative idea that's going to bring massive change is one thing. Executing that is a whole other issue. Contract management, for example. How do you negotiate with suppliers? And I've seen it firsthand. I have a cousin who started an app, really exciting. It's in the retail sector. His business has grown massively through COVID because people don't want to go into the shops. So they use his online shopping app. But he's had to learn the hard way how to pitch, how to source funding. He's probably had gray hairs now, mainly because the business needs to continue. And then how do you start running the business effectively? And I think it's always important to make sure that our curricula build that in, whether it's university, whether it's technical and vocational systems. We could even introduce it at some level of our schooling system. And I think just to provide structure, just to also get our policymakers to create a lot less bureaucracy for entrepreneurs. I think, if we could start there, we could probably make life a lot easier. And we know the statistics, that they cut across most countries. 80% of small businesses fail within the first 2 years. And if we go back and check with them, some of the key reasons is lack of funding for sustainability, and then probably lack of understanding all of the policies and protocols that they needed to follow. So that's at the heart of entrepreneurship, actually, not that bold idea, unfortunately. So for me, that's what I would say. Unfortunately, we've seen in all of our engagements, there's very little attention paid to the hard graft of running a business, but we do need to build that into our systems.
Yeah, very much. Bettina, what are your views on that? Because obviously you deal with large and small organisations. Obviously the large ones have got the support structure in place that Nazrene's mentioning there. But what sort of skills do you think we need to be thinking of to be able to bring in entrepreneurship for the future of those jobs of the future of work?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably only add to what Nazrene has set out there. And probably what I would add is, well, the resilience piece, indeed. And then what was going through my mind is, to every business and every entrepreneur, the right talent is key, of course, as well. And so we've got some fun stories about, startups that we've supported, and they're now multi-billion tech companies in the US. I will let you think about who that could be. But indeed, very quickly, there's issues of how do I manage now these other entrepreneurs or these like-minded around me, and then there's the whole payrolling and personnel. Oh, now I need to have a performance review conversation after a year or so. So these are things obviously we're there to help with as well, and that's what's important actually is to, and as Nazrene, you mentioned it, is to build that ecosystem where which expertise to fall back upon. I mean, one thing we see in general with entrepreneurs is they focus very much on again the idea, what they know how to do, and then they get the rest from the experts they can, and I guess that's a skill as it is, right? And it's actually something we see many other businesses going back to as well, and we will very likely see as an outcome of this crisis, as certain businesses will have to downsize or shift their business model and rethink what is at the core. Why back in those days did they create the company, and then they'll be getting the non-essential services from other places.
Yeah, no, very much. No, thank you. One other final point on the G20 and the B20 report, diversity. I think that's really important because this is coming from. If we sort of step back a minute, this is coming from a report that's coming out of Saudi Arabia, which is really quite interesting. And you look at some of the chairs on the group. There is a lot of diversity within there compared to what was happening in home nation, a decade ago. So how can we look to address diversity in the workplace, but also for those future leaders? Nazrene, any views you've got around that? Because you're taking the Global Apprenticeship Network view upon that.
So I think for me, the role of business leadership is key. I think, in fact, that was at the heart of the formation of the GAN. In 2012, at a B20 meeting in Argentina, business and government leaders and the ILO came together to say, we actually need a business-driven solution to the issue of youth unemployment, and apprenticeships are probably one of the best solutions for it. And here's the GAN. We've now evolved to say, we're moving beyond apprenticeships. We're talking about work-based learning, workforce development. We still need the business community to step up and to show up, because I think governments are constrained to their national policy. Governments, we know, work on supply side planning. Business can drive solutions to demand side to respond to that changing nature of the future of work, to the changing nature of the labor market. Because who drives the labor market system? It's business. And I think that's where the role of business is so important. And I think we've seen as the GAN really impressive leadership from our members, stepping up, committing to massive innovations and solutions during this time. Let me give you the example of Microsoft. Microsoft has something called the Global Skilling Initiative, and they're committed to training 25 million people in the top 10 tech jobs. So using free resources, tools that they've made available, and they want to do this by March next year. Look at the research that Bettina and Alanda has at the Adecco Group are leading, really shifting thinking around the future of work, really shaping responses within the employment and labor services sector, getting people to understand that the nature of work is changing. You know, often policymakers don't want to understand that the world of work is shifting, and it's shifting more rapidly than anticipated. I think this is where business can come in, work with policymakers to ensure that transitions are safe, they're smooth, and that, you know, even where there is impact, we can mitigate that impact with alternative skills development approaches and strategies. So for the GAN, we hinge our work on business leadership. We thrive because our members are open to engagement and are open to driving solutions around the world. So I can testify to the role of the business community. The B20 is a perfect example of how the business community comes together in a very structured policy system, because you have, you know, the G20, so the governments, you have the labor counterparts, you even have the community counterparts. But the heart of the change has to be driven by business for me.
Yeah, very much. Bettina, can I ask you, it's sort of putting two questions together, really. And it's the CEO for 1 month project, which you guys have been a part of, which I think is looking at diversity and entrepreneurship as well. And I don't know if you could explain the CEO for 1 month project to the audience, because I think it's really interesting. I think it's something we could all learn from there.
Oh, I'd love to, because it's an absolutely wonderful initiative indeed. It's about giving one, at the end of the day, or the end of the pyramid, one amazing, talented young person the opportunity to shadow a group country CEO for a month. And that one person is at the outset of a week-long, almost month-long assessment phase, where we ask young people to apply through our corporate website. The program runs in around 50 countries. We operate in around 60. It runs in about 50 countries. And this year we've had over 200,000 young talents indeed applying, through the system, going through extensive assessments, which, by the way, are, I think, very fun and also a learning as, in themselves. And again, as I said, there's a selection process as the weeks go on, and then at the end, one per country gets to shadow that country manager. There's an additional element, which is that out of the 50, out of that pool, then there's another assessment round, and then one of those 50 then gets to shadow the group CEO for another month. So quite an amazing program. Obviously, there's 50 lucky ones here, but what we've done over the years is to make sure that all of those who have applied benefit from joining as well, from giving their time, and also from their readiness to learn something as we share all the know-how we have in terms of how to better present yourself to the labor market, how to potentially address any skills gaps you have, how to speak better, how to focus on what is essential. And so that program is something that again we've been developing, and have also found indeed is of interest to other companies, which we of course are very pleased about.
Yeah, no, that's great. Can we go into the report that Adecco Group put together not too long ago, but it was in the middle of the pandemic, first shutdown. What shutdown are we going to be into next, or what's going to happen next? Who knows? But the resetting normal, defining a new era of work, I think was really, really interesting. What I could see within there was it's the changing role of work, and you know, people before, like I've read in the report that people in the States, for example, there's quite a high percentage of organisations weren't quite ready, and I'm sure this was across the world, people experiences, but I seem to pick out the point from the States that they just weren't ready to be able to offer home-based working instantly. And I'm sure everyone went through a big learning curve, but what can we see now from this current situation around, and the way that employees and employers are looking for those flexible working skills? How can we develop those, Bettina?
Yeah, look, I mean, indeed, let me, maybe if I may just come back to that report, indeed, Reset Normal, because it's given us fantastic insights actually on 5 key topics. One of them that relates to the questions you've also put to me is that indeed hybrid working is here to stay, and that links into this remote and of course the call for flexibility. So we see clearly that, and this is quite cataclysmic, because before the pandemic hit, notably employers in many countries were not ready to give that freedom or that flexibility. Now there was just no choice. And now we're seeing that on both the side of the workers, but also again the businesses, there is a readiness to consider that. And if we now take it to the skills required, well, actually quite massive changes. You know, you need to be able to drive yourself on a daily basis. You need to be able to change the focus of how you're working. In a way, a lot of people are used to having somebody watching them physically. And now, of course, that is less the case. You know, how do you deal with that newfound freedom? And actually, there's another piece, and that's the second outcome of the study, is that we see that it's not so much anymore about tracking the hours, as we know, but it's about tracking results. So we're seeing that there's going to have to be a new way of measuring productivity as it is, which of course we're quite aware is going to have some implications again on how I guess almost even work contracts are being defined, because, you know, I myself have a work contract of 40 hours a week here in Switzerland. I've had the liberty of working 80, so that's been perfectly fine. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But if we go to productivity based, that's going to have an impact. Then I'm on a roll here. The third outcome of the study, and that's actually a skill we haven't, or an angle we haven't touched on yet in our conversation, is what all of this means to leadership, and what it means to both leading teams but also being led. And we've seen that the shift of having most of your teams dispersed, or if I may say exploded, and not around you anymore, and how, you know, you being either as a leader stuck in front of a screen, or as a worker, you know, at the other end of the screen receiving now, let's not call it orders, but, you know, indications of what your day should look like. This has completely revolutionized the way work is being performed, and clearly this is something that's going to have a huge impact. I know that the colleagues in our organization who deal with supporting leaders and developing leadership skills, they're on it 26 hours a day, because elements of emotional intelligence, soft skills are just absolutely top of mind these days. And then back to this report, well, as we've actually discussed, it's the need to skill and upskill. It's something we knew before, but now it's clear that it's out there. So we've addressed that one. The interesting fifth outcome, and it probably ties in nicely again with the B20 conversation as well, is we found from the respondents to our study that employers have actually gained trust again. And so if we go back a few months back, if you remember, we probably lived in a world where companies, were more seen as the exploiters. Bad word, I know, but if I may exaggerate. And now it appeared clear that every business, at least that we've been connected with, they have done their utmost, their absolute utmost, to make sure that, first of all, people would still be receiving financial support, whether it's also through economic support measures of the government or not. Second of all, that they were well installed at their homes, and this is, by the way, something we're going to have to be looking at from a regulatory perspective, is all the health and safety measures. If you set up office remotely, what does that mean? But there was also, and there is also, the aspect of mental health, which is linked to this new way of working. And there was overall a realization again that employers and businesses actually really care about their people, which for many has been something new. Employers tell us it hasn't been much different to before, but it's just the necessity of this crisis, made it come out much more. So this was the last point, which is interesting. And if we come back to this context of the necessity to work together and to take responsibility that Nazrene alluded to in the beginning very heavily, and we can only subscribe to, I think it's going to be, we've seen indeed employers stepping up, and it's going to be interesting to see now after, with COVID, as we move on, how this is going to continue to evolve in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions around it. Interesting, I had 4 out of those 5 on my notes from your, so maybe I've picked up some good points from the report, or it must be a well-structured report. Nazrene, flexibility in workplace, flexibility in learning, brilliant on paper. We've all enjoyed working flexibly. Also, people have found it very frustrating at times. But apprenticeships, how do we deliver apprenticeships flexibly? What have you sort of seen as really cool best practice across the globe on sort of remote and flexible apprenticeship delivery?
Well, I must say, as the GAN, we've been pleasantly surprised at how many companies responded rather quickly as well to ensuring that skilling continued. GAN participated with the ILO in a global survey probably around May, so pretty early on in the pandemic, to see the impact on entities, particularly with respect to skilling. And the initial numbers were concerning. So by the end of May, at least 90% of companies had said they were directly affected, the skilling training component directly affected. 50% said that they actually structured alternative strategies for skilling. So some have either had at that stage either delayed it, or others found the different delivery mechanisms. So very quickly switched to digital, they switched to virtual, or switched to offline in different shapes and form. What did concern us is that 30% of companies said they were stopping their training activities. And I think, unfortunately, that is one of the areas that's always impacted on first in any kind of economic fallout. The training component in the company is probably one area where there is seen to be a discretionary budget, and that can be cut first. But I take heart from the fact that 70% of companies still continued or are continuing their training delivery targets, and training is taking place, albeit in different ways. What has been really fascinating for me is how companies have been so adaptable during this time. So I know the Adecco Group, I know all of the GAN members, in fact, are doing virtual onboarding for new staff. that for me is fascinating, because 6 months ago we wouldn't have never entertained the thought, but it can be done. And I've also now come across many of our members and partners across the world who are doing virtual apprenticeship training. So they've taken in their new cohorts, they've given them access to laptops, they've given them access to software to continue the work. Some have also now, as economies are starting to open up, they've started bringing back some apprentices, but only those who have to be on site. So for example, Firmenich is a GAN member. They're the world's largest producer of flavorings and perfumes. And many of their apprentices work in the laboratories. You can't do that virtually. So they've had to adapt to different mechanisms for training, social distancing. I find it very interesting. I've heard lots of people now say that the term should not be social distancing, because as humans, we are social, we engage, it's physical distancing.
Yeah, we
so
say
physical distancing is in place. Good. And it's a mental health issue, because we don't want to socially distance from one another. We still want to build our relationship. So it's so interesting, all of this new terminology that's coming up, rethinking the way we engage. But I think the good practice that we're seeing is that members and our partners across the different GAN networks are rolling out training. There's a level of consistency and adaptability. We've seen our vocational education partners also try to adapt. And quite interesting how quickly they've managed to do it. Where students didn't have laptops before, I've seen in several countries, national skills fund systems have come together, have found laptops or found funding for laptops. They've given data to learners. So I think what has been the most interesting outcome of COVID for me is how quickly governments can develop and implement policy. Where previously policy making took 2 years just for the discussions, and then another 2 years for implementation. Now we know our politicians can work in a matter of weeks and implement policy quickly, with intent, sometimes confusion, but that's another discussion for another day. But I think on the whole, this approach has given us faith, I think, that and some sense of hope and purpose that we can continue with our work. The Adecco Group has continued with little interruption in your operations. The GAN, we've probably been busier than ever. I think the issue of flexibility comes with that double-edged sword, because there are very little boundaries in place at the moment. So, this issue of productivity is going to be interesting, Bettina, how you measure. But I think it's also important, when we're building good practices in companies, what are we doing for our new intakes of learners who are now having to do all of this training offline? It was very interesting. I saw a presentation from an apprentice about 2 weeks ago, and they said that they're very happy that they've been able to continue with their learning. What they haven't come to grips with is not having a social system, that support system where they can engage with one another in person, where you can walk over to someone, ask for help. Those are the issues that we need to look at now. How do we build solutions for that learning on the job, physically on the job, that we probably took for granted?
Very, very much. It's difficult to do when there's physical distancing. It's about then physically walk over and such. What I thought was really interesting is some of the figures you gave there. Only the other day, we did a podcast. It's from a survey in England that it was done actually during the height of the UK first shutdown, where 35% of apprentices, it was an apprentice survey, said that all of their off-the-job training just come to an absolute halt. And this is, how do we then learn to then move forward and to sort of drive it? Bettina, he has a really interesting points with the report there. I think particularly around leadership, and particularly around emotional intelligence, really. And 74% of the people surveyed said that they wanted leaders with empathy and a supportive attitude. How can we bring that into ground level, people starting their career, but also how do we help the leaders of the future, but the leaders of the now, to be able to adapt to having remote teams? How do we sort of move that forward with the future of work?
What a question. And I can tell you that we're seeing some struggle quite heavily. it's almost about bringing to the front your innate human and collaborative skills as it is, and this is where, to bring back another very, very, very important element that we quickly touched on, which is diversity. This is where diversity will be part of the solution and the game changer, both in recognizing that diverse teams, and that's been on the table for quite a while, that there's a business case for diversity. But so to connect this to the leadership, the moment you're open to having different people also, the cooperative approach, cooperation approach, and just bringing forward the basic human common sense elements, you're going to do okay. But indeed, so it's not about hierarchies anymore. It's not about giving orders and expecting that the others will just basically blindly follow. It's not about structure the way we knew it. So it's quite a revolution going on in that space for sure. And there's going to be quite a few people, I'm afraid, that will be struggling. And it's the opportunity now for everybody else to maybe also be a little bit understanding and patient, but to put the finger on it and say, it's things have changed, so please open up. And look, the literature is immense these days. Again, there's specialists like in our case our colleagues at Lee Harrison who do wonderful workshops based on assessments first. So probably I would advise any leader these days to go through such an assessment and then take such a coaching and such a workshop. I think they'd be very surprised at what comes out, and it can only be beneficial.
Yeah, very much. The next point I wanted to raise, and it'll be my final one, and I think it's probably the most important actually, is first of all, it made me, maybe some people don't know what they wish for really, with the end of the 9 to 5 and being delivered on results. Obviously, those who may not have had a sales background in the past and don't know about sort of achieving targets and stuff like that. But what I thought was very interesting was around productivity. Bettina, I've done the same as you. I've done far too many 80 to 100 hour weeks, too many. And that's not productive. And that's not sustainable. And it's moving forward.
I feel I'm very productive, but sustainable there, that's true.
It's totally not. You can't keep going at that rate. No. And the amount of people I know that have gone on quite rapid holidays have been very, very large, actually, at different times, which are unusual, and loads of meetings cancelled as a result of that. I would say it's really unsustainable, and it's something which is really affecting leaders in particular, because they've got to adapt to remote teams, remote situations, and it's all very different. How do we help with time management, with people, the new normal not meaning excessive workload, where people can actually switch off? And with the massive part of your report is around people being healthy at work and have time for family, but also another part of people's new normal is the excessive amount of workload that they've had to take on, and other colleagues contacting them 24/7 and they're unable to switch off. They're used to being in an office. They can't switch it off at home. They're at home. It's just always constantly there. And I think there's all sorts of issues around that, around stress, well-being, productivity. How do we help? I think that starts with leaders really, through to then entry-level people. How do we help instill that balance back at work again, so as people can have that work-life balance?
Yeah, again, if I may take that. So there's a movement, as you know, which is the right to disconnect. And that has actually, triggered logically so by our trade union friends for all the right reasons. And that is something that is now entering the policy landscape as well. And indeed, we're going to have to see what does it mean to working hour regulation. How are we going to set that out? I don't have the answer yet at this stage. We're in early days, and we're seeing a growing number of countries coming up with regulation around remote work and what that means in general. Parts of it is the working hours, but there's also, again, all the questions around health and safety in the broader sense. And then there's questions around what financial support are you allowed to receive as well if, you know, your employer or actually your country legislation asks you to be. So this is now slowly starting, but that's definitely an area where in the policy world, which again, you know, we're looking at heavily, or I'm looking at heavily, will be part of our future imminently and for a long time, I'm sure. What I've seen, interestingly, is that actually the HR function in general is one that has exponentially increased in importance in these times because of all the points that you have just mentioned. And actually, if you look at literature and go into also what the press is saying, you can see that in many companies, the HR director or the chief HR officer has really now gotten the acknowledgement that she or he, you know, would have deserved in any case. But now those who have stepped it up are the ones that have made this big difference, taking anybody across the organization in a way by the hand, finding the right way of also being there for all the personalities that we have in companies, which now do come out, of course. And then importantly, also being part of the team. And this is where, by the way, IT and digital information officers have also risen in the hierarchy if there was one. So together working out ways in which collaboration could be redefined digitally, but also what ways, in which ways teams could be working together going forward. I think the one thing, and this is probably just another hour though, is that all of this, of course, relates to people who are in an employment relationship, right? Who are working at a company with a so-called boss, or who are bosses and workers themselves. But let's not forget that actually the vast majority of people are not in an employment relationship, and they face exactly the same challenges, if not more. And I think that's something to unpack for you, Gavin, at another moment. And I'd be happy to be part of that conversation, of course, but that's definitely one that governments need to tackle. And when it comes to what skills are required for all of those out there, again, that's a completely different story.
No, that's great.
And
Nazrene,
Gavin, if I could throw a caveat, that's for all the people who can work remotely and can work flexibly. There's a whole other set of health and safety requirements for those individuals who have to be on site. And you know, how do you manage that responsibility towards them? Because they're probably, you know, let's think about our frontline healthcare workers. You know, remote working is a dream, I think. So how do you compensate them effectively? How do you ensure that they have the proper PPE? How do they maintain safety and security when traveling in public transport, etc.? So it's become really, really complex in terms of managing people at the moment. And Bettina's quite right. You know, the role of HR was often seen as compliance related, and now it is a strategic function central to the sustainability of organizations and the well-being of the people.
Yeah, 100%. I could talk to Nazrene, I could talk to you for hours, Bettina for hours and hours, but I think we're going to have to call that a close. I think we're going to, Bettina, an incredibly important point around the whole change of the world of work and the gig economy and the flexibilities that brings, but it's a double side to that. And particularly in the world at the moment, if you're struggling with in an employed situation, what does it also mean for those in a gig economy? What a great topic we should cover in the future. Nazrene, Bettina, thank you so much for your time today and helping us to unpack the skills that are needed for the future of work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Be safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Why not click subscribe so you can be informed when the latest next individual podcasts or podcast mini-series from FE News are going to be released.